Good evening, everybody. Thank you for watching. This is Apollo Detectives Part 3. I am Ben Emlyn Jones. I am joined by my trusty hosts, Andrew Traplin and Neil Geddes Ward. And we have a new lineup of panel to talk about the Apollo moon missions this evening. We're probably only saying what a lot of people are thinking, but will not dare. And I hope with this particular program, it'll encourage more and more people to speak out. We are a very small vocal tip of a huge silent iceberg, but let's make the rest of that iceberg as vocal as the tip. So Bart, how did you come about making your video?
Well, I grew up being the biggest fan of the moon missions that I knew of. I mean, like, my dad was in the Air Force, and I grew up around aviation, and my dad got a VIP package of 9x12 color prints of Apollo 11, gave them to me as a 4-year-old. I had them up on my wall for about 10 years, looking at them every single day, 3,600 times in 10 years. And then when I was 14, I saw Bill Casing on a television, and he said we didn't go to the moon. I'm like, oh, I've never heard of that one before. Let me take a second look at these pictures. And sure enough, the shadows intersect. There's no burn crater under the lunar module, and you can kind of see the background, soil, and the soil they're standing on are in two different colors, where you can see almost a straight line, which is a fake backdrop. And I came to the conclusion that, with all this evidence that the Soviets were 5 times more advanced than we were, that 2 of the 3 astronauts wouldn't give interviews, that the administrator of NASA resigned days before the first mission, all these things, I said there's at least, a 1 out of 4 chance that they didn't go to the moon. And we had an investor who gave us a total for these 2 films, $1 million. He works for NASA as a board member of an aerospace company building rockets for them. This is the guy who financed our films, and he knows from an engineering point of view, the lunar module didn't have enough battery power to combat against 250 degrees outside and get it down to 72 degrees like they claim. Had they made it too hot or too cold, it would have been believable, but they're so arrogant, they say it's the perfect 72 degrees on a bank of car batteries. They wouldn't power a Cadillac for more than 20 minutes in the desert at against 100 degrees. He said the computers with 1/millionth the computing power of a cell phone, there's no way they could synchronize going from 0 miles per hour on the moon to 4,000 miles per hour in the alleged command module orbiting the moon, and synchronize that. If they were off by more than 1/20th of a second, they would have missed each other, and there was no way computers were fast enough to calculate that. So all this information, 3.5 years into the film, I pop in a tape and it says on the screen, do not show to the public. I'm like, oh, this should be interesting. So I hit fast forward and I see like a little blue ball Earth with the rest of the screen, black, like the Earth floating in space. And apparently this is supposed to be the camera lens at the window of the glass shooting the tiny Earth far away as if they're halfway to the moon. In fact, the part that they aired that says Neil Armstrong calling in from 130,000 miles out, right? So the camera was really at the back of the spacecraft. The circular window has, part of the Earth outside of it, and they either are sectioning off the Earth, or have a transparency that, to mimic the Earth. And basically, you see in real time, unedited, them faking being halfway to the moon right in front of your eyes. And then there's a third party of audio of the CIA that they accidentally let be recorded. And so you hear NASA say the TV picture looks great. And then exactly 4 seconds go by, you hear this third party say, talk, and then Neil Armstrong speaks. So originally I thought, well, he's not paying attention. They're saying, hey, pay attention here. But in fact, they wanted him to wait 4 seconds to give the impression that he's further away from the Earth than he really was. He was really about 250 miles up, and he could respond directly like you and I are, but there was supposed to be an increased radio delay. So they counted off 2 seconds for the radio signal to reach the astronauts if they were halfway to the moon, 2 seconds for it to come back, and then they said talk to make sure that he didn't speak until 4 seconds go by to create this fake time delay as if he were really halfway to the moon. The lights come up, you see the real position of the camera, you can see all this, and a funny thing happened on the way to the moon. And then you really think about it, it's so simple. They're claiming they went 1,000 times farther than they can go today with 50-year-older technology. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, even here on Earth, Mount Everest, right, and the South Pole, that took numerous tries for them to go. And in fact, in the entire history of aviation, there's never been a flying machine that worked on its first occasion. The 747 was built with 10 years newer technology than the Apollo rocket, and it took 162 attempts. And if you can show me any time in the entire history of the world that a technological achievement was accomplished, like the automobile or the airplane or nuclear power, that 50 years after the accomplishment, no one on Earth was able to repeat it. If you can show me one other occasion where that happened, then I'll admit that we didn't go. There's never been an accomplishment in the entire history of the world that no one could repeat 50 years later. That's like saying 50 years ago, I built an automobile that could go 1,000 miles an hour, and 50 years later, the fastest car is 1 mile per hour. I talked to a professor at a major university, and I said, what if you saw an Apollo astronaut go on national TV and tearfully confess that they were fake? What would you think then? He said, I'd still think that they went. Mark Twain said this: it is easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. And here's what Carl Sagan said, and some believe he was hinting at the moon landings when he said this right before his death. One of the saddest lessons of history is this, he said: if we've been bamboozled long enough, we tend to reject any evidence of the bamboozle. We're no longer interested in finding out the truth. The bamboozle has captured us. It's simply too painful to acknowledge, even to ourselves, that we have been taken. Once you give a charlatan power over you, you almost never get it back.
That's sadly, that's true.
He was specifically talking about the moon landings. Now, we have a publication written by von Braun himself that says to go to the moon in one rocket is impossible. It'll take 3 rockets, each weighing 800,000 tons. First, you'd have to go and build the space station, and then from there, ferry the fuel. Of course, the space station wasn't even officially finished until a few years ago. You only had 3 picture and a TV, 3 people in each mission, and a TV picture controlled by the government. And then so Bill Casing was in this pyramid at the very top, editing all these, departmentalized things, and he saw that memo that said the odds of going successfully to the moon and back with their equipment and not killing the people was 1 in 10,000. And what a surprise! 2 years ago, Kelly Smith from NASA says about the Orion project that the radiation belts that surround the Earth that are 1,000 miles up and about 30,000 miles thick beyond that, every manned mission has been below that, orbiting the Earth, except going to the moon. He calls it a dangerous field of radiation, and he says, and we must first learn to protect astronauts from this dangerous radiation before we send people through this region of space, which means the technology does not yet exist. They sent 2 Geiger counters. The Orion project sent an unmanned spacecraft 3,600 miles up, U-turned and come back. So if a person walks to the store, U-turns and comes back, their destination was the store. The point of the mission was the store. So what is that? 3,600 miles. It's the radiation. They sent 2 different types of Geiger counters in there to measure the radiation and to come back. That was the whole point of the mission. So I call them up and I say, hey, can I please have those readings of the radiation? They say that information is classified. Is the amount of helium in Jupiter's atmosphere, is that classified? So how could the radiation readings, an element of nature, why would that be classified? Only if by proving that it's like, 100 to 1,000 times a lethal dose, that means they didn't go to the moon. That's why they won't release that information. It's amazing. It proves it right there they didn't go. Not to mention they destroyed all the schematics. They destroyed the original videotapes. They destroyed the original telemetry data. That's like saying Bill Gates spent $150 billion to build the first computer, and when he was done, he threw it and all the schematics into the fire. So they're saying, show me any other time in history where a technological accomplishment, the original hardware and the original schematics were destroyed. Show me that in history.
Yeah, I would like to actually offer some additional commentary on what Bart was just talking about and stuff. You mentioned about the Orion mission, which carried those 2 Geiger counters into space. They've since released that at least a graph of what the data showed. It's important to note that the spacecraft, the Orion capsule, is rated at about 20 grams per square centimeter of shielding, which is about 3 times the shielding that they had on Apollo. They pitched their results from Orion against their predictions for the X9, and what they found is that the dose rates that they received on the Orion were much more akin to what they were predicting for a shield at about 10 grams per square centimeter, which just goes to show that there's much more radiation up there than they were predicting in their own models.
Oh, yes, but it's a different type of radiation. It's not the type of radiation that could penetrate their shield, whatever their shields were. It's a different type of radiation. You've probably come across this rebuttal before. What do you think to that? What's your view on that?
Well, I've got actually proof that it is wrong. In fact, I'll just screen share something with you right now. Well, here's the data that's actually from that Astronautical Engineering and Science book. This is by J.W. Keller et al. 1963. And basically what this graph shows is this here is the proton energy, and this here is the range in grams per square centimeter. Basically, the higher the energy, the further these protons can penetrate. And so you can see clearly from this graph that I've looked at this line here. This represents how much shielding they had on Apollo. The Apollo capsule was 8 grams per square centimeter, and so this is how much radiation they can attenuate. You see, it can only block out protons with energies up to about 8 mega electron volts. And the reason this is important is because the Van Allen radiation belts, they have protons in the range of 0.1 to 400 mega electron volts. Of course, the flux gets a bit lower towards the higher energies and stuff, but this is the fluxes. You see, what you use, if you know the coordinates for a given region in space, such as the trajectory that's been attributed to the Apollo missions, you plug that into the AX8, and this will give you a flux, basically how much particles at a given energy basically interacting with this square centimeter of space. Okay, so here, for example, let's see, L equals 1.44, and the 10 MeV, we see there's 2.87 by 10 to the 2. All right, that's how many protons there are at that energy at 10 mega electron volts. Basically, take the protons per square centimeter per second. You would multiply that by the surface area of a human, and because it's in seconds, you want to convert that to hours. There are 3,600 seconds in an hour. That gives you the amount of protons per hour. Then you would want to multiply it by the surface area of a human, which will basically give you the protons per hour. Now, each proton has a certain energy, so you would times that by the energy in question. That will give you the amount of energy in mega electron volts per hour. 1 mega electron volt is equal to 1.6 by 10 to the minus 13 joules. So they use that conversion. That will give you the amount of joules per hour. And now the human body has a mass of about 75 kilograms. So you divide that by 75. That will give you the amount of gray per hour. And if you choose, you can further convert that to rads per hour. Right? And in this case, I converted it to rad per minute. Now that will tell me how much rads they would have received. This is actually the absorbed dose, though. You see, there's an absorbed dose and there's an equivalent dose. The absorbed dose is the amount of radiation that's actually been absorbed into the human body. To find out what kind of damage it will do, you want to convert that into the equivalent dose. So you would multiply it by a Q factor. So you would take the absorbed dose and you would multiply it. In this case, I found that a Q factor of 5 is most consistent with other calculations that have been done for solar flares that are known of known fluence, right? And so, as I said, the Q factor was most consistent with 5. The AP8 actually has a whole bunch of shortcomings, you see, because it's very difficult to measure protons and electrons at higher energies, you see, because as the protons get higher in energy, they actually will penetrate completely through the spacecraft, and they will only deposit a little amount of energy in the detector. So for every hit that you're getting by the detector, there's probably 100 or so more that you're not detecting.
From Jarrah's calculations, from that 1950s program, and from an article we have from Scientific American magazine, the magnitude ranges anywhere from 10 to 100 to up to 7,300 times more radiation than a lethal dose. That's why they cannot go to the moon. Plus, they do not have a rocket large enough. Plus, they would need to ferry fuel to a waste station at a space station first. They did not do. Again, if you could show me any time in technological history that a milestone was made and no one could repeat it for 50 years, then I'll say that the moon landing is real. The fact that they can't repeat it and they can only go 1/1000th the distance with 50 years newer technology, what more proof do you need? But here's the link to Scientific American magazine that says that the radiation is at this time from the Geiger counter probe that they sent up, which broke because it was vibrating so much because the radiation was so severe it broke the Geiger counter. And in this, they say what a lethal dose is, like 1 rem per day or week or year, whatever it is, I forget. And then that compared to the radiation dose of going through, and it's something like 10 to 100 times a lethal dose in this publication. Not to mention a time when they say on television it's 1,000 times a lethal dose. I don't know what more. Then you have the creator of the rocket, saying that you need 3 rockets, 800,000 tons each, to go to the moon, and then he builds a Saturn V, which weighs 2,500 tons, to go to the moon. I mean, is this guy incompetent? Can he be wrong by 30,000% on his math? Can math change 30,000% in a year? So, math never changed, and the fuel never changed, and the weight never changed of the rocket, so how could its capability change? I mean, it's one lie after another. It's unbelievable. There's so much more evidence that we did not go to the moon than there is. And if a professor, right, of a major university, Vanderbilt University, right, has the audacity to say, if he saw an astronaut confess that the moon missions were fake on live television, he would still think that they went, then we can see there that psychology is overriding people's intellect of being able to discern truth from lies.
I just want to know, when you're looking at the Orion numbers there,
Yes.
okay, and I've looked at that same document, and I also looked up how they set the tests up. The battery-operated radiation detectors on the setup were set inside of closets, shielded closets, with a meter of sand around it and then a meter of water covering them as well. And the other thing is that Apollo has windows. Orion has the windows completely covered. So it's not a real fair comparison. I mean, how much shielding do the windows have?
I'm not sure what kind of glass they were using on the Apollo. I imagine they would have been using something like lead glass. I'm not sure, but I'd have to look into that.
The square windows have a double pane, and the triangular ones only have a single pane. The outside glass is for micromedia shielding, and it is vented to the outside. Here's a nice shot of the flag here. See how nice and soaking wet it is. I'm sure keeping it wet on the moon stops it from degrading so much. You can see all the water there. You can see it drying on the edges back. You can see that it's an official flag. The stars are stitched on there. It's not like other people that say it's aluminum or anything like that. What I'd like to do is Apollo 15 on Hadley Ridge. This is the ridge itself, right where the astronauts were on Apollo 15. They're claiming that it is 1,200 feet deep. And you can see the scale across the bottom there. It's just about a mile across, just a little under a mile across there. So there's the CN Tower in Toronto. It's 1,150 feet to the restaurant. Empire State Building's 1,200 feet to the roof right there. So those are the images that you can see that you're looking at. And there's actually where they're standing. That's a mile across there and 1,200 feet deep. You can see that quite clearly. It's just a complete error in simulation. And right there, if you're looking back at this map here, off the edge, right off that corner, is the LEM should be sitting straight there. And I've been looking for it everywhere. I even have an elevation map to show it's not there anywhere in that shot. It's just a total error in simulation to have that a mile across that way. There's the actual map where you can see exactly where they were sitting. Comparison to the other photographs there. So now you're looking right at that corner right there. And that's where they're shooting from. They should be able to see the LEM from there. And it just quite clearly isn't there. But the depth of this thing is just on, like, that might be 130 or 40 feet across and maybe 75 or 80 feet deep. That's supposed to be 1,200 feet deep. Like, if you're standing at the observation deck on the Empire State Building and looking down, that's what you'd be looking at. Here's Meteor Crater, which is about half the depth of what they claim Hadley Ridge is, but it's approximately the same distance across. This is just under a mile across. There you can see it's 560 feet deep, and it's just about 3/4 of a mile across. That image that you're looking at on there is just an absolute fantasy land little simulation that they did. They weren't even close. Now, when it comes to vacuums, most people claim that a vacuum of space is the difference between one atmosphere. So why would they build this building? And I even talking to a few people, and they say, well, this was a make-work project, and they were using inferior materials just to get rid of it. The concrete. There's 8 feet thick of concrete and another 2 feet thick of steel. The interior design of this thing, it is specially lined in there with an anti-corrosive on it, because when you get down to a torr level, you get down to about a torr value of 10 to the -4, you start getting into off-gassing even in metals. Even aluminum starts off-gassing hydrogen at that level. Pull up a little video clip here from what we did, Paul and I did. This is just a quick little one.
They stand on the outside of the tank, and it implodes in a thrilling fashion.
That is only low pressure. You're not even getting into the torr value. You still have, you've only reduced to 176 torr. You're not even into a minus scale at that level. Other people claim that there's only one difference of 1 atmosphere when you go into a vacuum, and that a pop can would do it. This is only at about 400 torr that this goes off at. Now, a pop can will handle about 80 pounds of pressure on it, and that's just with a little home vacuum to rough it down. So now we're going to get into a little bit on the suits itself, because this you're going to find it absolutely amazing. As you can see here, these are just quick release clips that are on here. Okay, there's no inner bladder like they claimed to keep the suit from popping out. There's another shot of the interior from the top helmet on it. These have just like a door latch on there, and that's just a rubber seal. This door latch holding the cap in will not compress that seal down in any way, shape, or form. This is the back of the suit. There's the zipper, that blue with the bead on it there. And there's that much space in there, and the air can come right down through the top on this thing. There's absolutely no way, you can see that it was sealing anything off at all.
So what we're looking at here is a spacesuit, essentially, with 2 strips of Velcro and press studs. How would that seal, or how are they telling us that it seals?
Well, I'm just showing you the back. That's as far as the zipper goes up right there.
Right.
What I'm showing you is like these suits are just completely designed for simulation, just on the set to keep them cool. The head unit here, you can see down at the bottom, that's where the little fan that's blowing the air around coming up out of the PLSS, and the PLSS isn't exactly the one that you would need to be on the moon with. All it is a set of cooling coils running around in there. But you can see that none of this stuff is going to do anything. And there again, you see there's no inner bladder on that. And then the suit, all of these are attached right to the outside of the suit. They're not attached to an inner bladder in any way, shape, or form. And the one guy that's working for NASA or writes on their journal site has a book out. It's Paulo Altamisto or something is the guy's name. And he claims that it's another completely different suit. That's just a band to hold on the top shielding of the suit. When you see the original on this with just the way those rings are, there's the gloves themselves, and you see they're done exactly the same way. No inner liner, no seal. This is, on the left-hand side, are what seals would be for that level of vacuum that they're in. And when you get to a torr value of 10 to the minus 6, you can't use rubber. You got to use metal rings on them, and they have to be properly compressed down. And of course, these don't have any of these. These are just quick release, so you can put them on and off for simulation. And the helmet's exactly the same way. Even something as small as a hair would stop them from being able to pump down a vacuum here on Earth. Can you imagine now they're coming in and out of the LEM, covered in dust, over top of the door seals. Here's a couple of shots of Apollo 11. This is Buzz Aldrin coming down the ladder, and you can see the red here and the red here. The gloves aren't even attached. Like, here's Smith, and he's just absolutely covered in mud here on the left, and then they've actually washed it off to take the next shot. There's Cernan. There's his sleeve right there on Cernan from Apollo 17. You can see it, nice shiny mud right on there, like that. Like I said, they're spending a whole lot of money just so they can keep alive two guys playing in the mud with a wet flag. If you look at how the gloves are done up, that ring is sitting there and this other one's this far up, and that's the distance between them. This is Buzz Aldrin. This is the man on the moon shot, the most famous shot in the world, right? And his glove isn't done up.
So you're saying that underneath that, the flap that's pulled up over Aldrin's wrist, underneath that flap, the actual seal is undone. Is that what you're saying, Scott?
Yeah, there's not enough room. You can see the black ring right there.
Okay.
Black band. Then there's that. That's how far down it is into the glove to get the other ring is there. So the rings are this far apart. Might be a little closer there. Might be up to there. That's about it. There's that much space in between them. They're not connected. You can see it right there. You can see it along the line of it, and that's the black band. And the other ring is down here, and it doesn't pull up.
You mentioned the PLIS, the PLSS, the personal life support system. It consists. Is there an oxygen tank and just a cooling system and heating and things like that?
There's a few liters of water which is pumped around to cool the astronauts, and we're told that it is sublimated out, and you get the decompression of water removing the heat. But you never see any clouds of steam or clouds of ice crystals which would occur on the lunar surface if it was doing that. A lot of people who use scuba equipment who would dearly love to have a tank that they could use for 8 hours underwater, which is what we're told happened on Apollo 17. They were out on the EVA for 8 hours without replenishing any of the equipment they were carrying on the back. No water. You can do the calculation. I think Ralph Rene did the calculation in his book. How much water would you need to remove the predicted amount of heat that will be generated on the lunar surface? So I'd just like to go back to something you mentioned earlier. You made a reference to a film indicating that how it was all done. Make believe.
That's it.
And mirrors. The chapter which is entitled Who was behind it, who was behind the fabrication of Apollo, he comes up with two very, very interesting names. One of them is Douglas Trumbull, who was Stanley Kubrick's special effects director on 2001. He also did the special effects on Back to the Future, Star Trek the movie, Blade Runner, and Close Encounters. He was using models on all those. They weren't CGI. Now, Jarrah, I know, has done work on the slow motion figures. In the enhanced version, there are 7 different slow motion speeds that he's identified, depending on where the astronauts happen to be in relation to the camera. He also says the camera is also very busy, which distracts the viewer. The camera always appears to be moving. The problem was that you cannot film a slow motion effect of sand dropping. So when you get an astronaut kicking the sand, his movement appears to be slower than the sand is falling at, which indicates that because you can put a lot of things on wires, like astronauts and pieces of equipment, you can't put sand on wires. So the sand is one of the big giveaways of the slow motion technique. There were 3 different film sizes used: 16 millimeter, 36 millimeter, and 70 millimeter. These were all used as a result of the technique of transferring the information, probably 16 millimeter originally, onto different sizes and different speeds and different falling rates to make it appear to be on the moon. There's also a lot of model work done, and a very large scale model of the lunar surface derived from lunar orbiter photographs. That's where most of them come from. So those films are still available. As I say, if you know where to look, you go on the Aldous website or go on Trevor Weaver's website. And I'd also like to mention another book just published by Randy Walsh, who lives quite near to Scott, in Toronto. And he's working on his part 2. This is the Apollo moon missions, Hiding a Hoax in Plain Sight, part 1. Part 2 looks into more detail. It's a fairly technical book, so it's a great interest to people who are looking at the technical side, as we are, of Apollo. And Randy has done a great job in collating the information, putting it together, and publishing it in a fairly easily assimilated format.
Coming back to the make-believe movie, Marcus, is it the person who doesn't want to be identified? I mean, I don't know who they are, and I wouldn't say so if I did. But is it actually an insider, someone who actually produced, either it was Trumbull or someone else who produced the original moon hoax footage, the NASA footage?
I don't know that, to be honest. Whoever has produced the film has put a lot of work into it. As I say, the film itself is 2 hours, 44 minutes. It's much easier to watch it with subtitles so you can hear what he's saying. But whoever has done it has a great technical knowledge of photography and special effects and how models would look under different situations. It's a very, very comprehensive investigation. One possible location for where it was all put together originally is Lookout Mountain Laboratory, which is north of Los Angeles. It was a US Air Force facility up to the end of the 1960s when it was moved to, I believe, McGill Air Force Base. They were very proud of the fact that they had the best equipped photographic film studio in Hollywood. It was better than any of the Hollywood studios. They produced technical films, promotional film, propaganda films. That's on the face of it. Now, they had the facilities there to produce something much more spectacular. Now, Lookout Mountain Laboratory still exists. It's now a private house owned by Gerard Leto, the singer and actor. It's quite a big facility, and it could well have been used. I don't know if it was or not, but it makes sense that it might have been used.
There's possible, I wouldn't say definite, but possible suggestions. If I can share this.
This is Carl's book, Carl James.
No, it was Alphabet and Moon. And in the book, he's an astronomer in the UK. He also used to be a helicopter pilot, but he's actually also a bit of a Apollo fan, if you like. And he's gone round various events where some of the astronauts have been appearing. And he noted that they all had slightly different stories and experiences of going to the moon. Some could hear sounds when they were going down in the lunar module. Others said it was very, very quiet and things like that. Some remember stars, some don't, that kind of thing. But one of the interesting things was that he's been going around schools in the UK and doing presentations. But one of the things he said that was when he was clearing up after one of his presentations to the kids, and this was some school in Bedfordshire in the UK, he said that the audio-visual technician guy that was helping him clear up, a very old gentleman, said that he remembers back in the late 60s meeting Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin at Cardington Hangars, which I think we might have mentioned earlier, in Bedfordshire. And this is where they had the R101 airships, huge, great big hangars. and they had a complete Apollo moon set there, including lunar module in the Carlton Hangar Halls in Bedfordshire in the UK in 1969, where he said he met Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, and he said it was all hush hush, but because he worked there at the time, he met them. So that line kind of could account for maybe some connection with the Kubrick story about saying, well, he couldn't fly to the US because he was scared of flying or something like that. But, you know, the Apollo astronauts maybe came to the UK to do it. I don't know, but it was just an interesting thing that I thought I'd mention.
Those two hangars, these huge hangars, which were used to construct airships in the early 20th century, they're the biggest indoor spaces in Britain.
Yeah,
and if you wanted to have a film set, indeed films have been made there. The Batman movie was made. One of the new Star Wars trilogy was made there. It would be a place to go, especially if Kubrick was coerced in some way into getting involved.
Those type of things I find rather disturbing, because I don't want my children or my grandchildren to be brought up in a world where reality isn't really there. They should learn the truth. They should learn exactly what we're capable of as a species. Like it's fine to have the imagination. It's fine to promote space. It's fine to promote science and technology and stuff like that. But the reality is we got to look after this planet, and to think the fact that we can do all these wonderful things in space. Everybody thinks that, if we mess something up on the planet, we can fix that too. The fact of the matter is we haven't been able to fix anything. All we've done is destroy this planet at an alarming rate. And when you have people saying, we'll just terraform a new planet and move there, it makes us feel that we're invincible as a species, that we will survive without it. We need this planet, and we need to pay more attention and to look after it.
That's a sad fact, yeah. And it's this. So really, what you're saying, Scott, and I agree, is that what happens out there in terms of what our space exploration stories and how real they are and how fake they are has instant and very serious ramifications for the well-being of life on Earth.